Good morning and welcome back to the Gamecock Scoop podcast. It's the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com, which is the home for Gamecock sports on Rivals. I can't tell you how difficult it's been to get this podcast done. I've been trying to go live since yesterday, and every time I get about 10 or 15 minutes in, I have a huge coughing fit, which is not great for live. So I decided I'm just going to record this and then I can cut out all of my really terrible moments. So if you see me here and then suddenly it jumps to here or whatever, then you know I probably just coughed a lot. But luckily for you, I cut it out. So yeah, I'm dealing with some allergies or something over here, but we're gonna power through. We're gonna make it work. So yeah, welcome back to the Gamecock Scoop podcast. I'm gonna do this episode solo today. Zach has actually been traveling around for us. He's gone to the DMV area and talked to several Gamecock targets there, including recent commitment Zabari Sandy. And he also found his way up to Connecticut for a bit to talk to 2024 South Carolina quarterback target Dante Reno. And he'll have a lot coming out on GamecockScoop.com over the next few days in regards to all that. And we'll talk to him on the podcast next week about how all that went. So looking forward to all that. Lots of good content coming out in the next few days. I do have a few news and notes to get to before we start to analyze some of the things going on in the world of football and specifically in the South Carolina Gamecocks corner of the football world. Also, sorry, I'm going to be taking lots of sips of water because my voice is just raw right now. So bear with me. All right. So the biggest news out of the athletic department this week was that South Carolina added a new member to their football staff in former NFL head coach Freddie Kitchens. Kitchens spent 1 year as the head coach of the Browns, about a year and a half if you count the time he spent as the interim head coach. And his connection with Beamer comes from their time back in 2004, 2005, together on the Mississippi State staff. But they've stayed in touch in that time. And Coach Beamer said the other day at the Gamecock Club meeting in Rock Hill that they just got to talking, and Kitchens was getting some other similar offers to be like an analyst. And because of their relationship, Beamer just was like, well, why don't you come do that here? And so they did. So yeah, his official role is like senior analyst. He'll primarily be working on the offensive side of the ball, helping with game planning and doing some scouting of opponents, but also, of the team itself, as well as other evaluations. In talking to some people out of Cleveland or people familiar with the Browns, one of the drawbacks from his time there was that he wasn't so good at making in-game adjustments, but they often started games very quickly, kind of showing that he was pretty good in the game planning aspect. It's just once, things settled into a game, he struggled a little bit more. So, I mean, he's not going to be asked to be making in-game adjustments or anything as an analyst. So actually, it sounds like his role is going to fit in quite well with his strengths here at South Carolina, and we'll see how that all plays out. Beamer also mentioned at that Gamecock Club meeting that some of his roles, will get fleshed out as time goes along. So we will see how all of that goes. Also, on the football side of things, recruiting is really ramping up here. And I would expect in the next few weeks that we're going to really start to see some of those commitments land. The next announcement that you should be looking for is Trovon Ball, O lineman. He is set to announce on May 28th, and I have already put in a future cast for him to the Gamecocks, and I'll be surprised if you guys aren't happy on May 28th. So look out for that. And then in June, there's just a couple of real monster official visit weekends that are starting to come together. One aspect I wanted to focus on just based on this week is wide receiver. So Aiden Williams, 4-star wide receiver out of Ridgeland, Mississippi. He just announced this week that he's going to be taking an official visit on June 24th. So that weekend is turning out to be a pretty big one. And then two other wide receivers, Jaden Greathouse and Devin Hyatt, I'm sorry. Two other 4-stars are going to be taking their official visits on the weekend of June 10th. So if Coach Stepp, wide receiver coach, can land one, or what would be even better, obviously, is all three of those guys, then you're really starting to see some depth start to build in that wide receiver room. Because after this season, Josh Van is likely to move on. Who knows with DeCarrion Joyner. Amarian Brown is getting near the end of his eligibility. And then you have the transfers, Corey Rucker and Antoine Wells Jr., who both do still have a few more years left of eligibility, but depending on how well things go, we'll have to see. Another announcement for an official visit this weekend or this week was 4-star edge Kelby Collins out of Alabama. He is going to be here for that June 10th weekend. So like I said, June 10th, June 24th, those are the two big weekends to keep in mind. And I will be really surprised if there aren't several welcome homes and even public commitments coming out of those 2 weekends. So definitely a good time to be subscribed to GamecockScoop.com, where you'll get all the latest from all these recruits and what's going on behind the scenes, and getting ready for the 2022 football season. There's also a couple offers that went out this week. One of the big ones is O-lineman DJ Geth out of Dorman, who is O-lineman Marquis Anderson's teammate. So if you could somehow land both those guys for the 2023 class, you're really starting to build a nice pipeline to Dorman High School, which is obviously one of the top high schools in the state. But also really solidifying that offensive line for the future with some solid in-state guys. Now, one of the offers this week that kind of blew my mind because I just didn't realize that he was this old yet. 2024 cornerback Dre Kirkpatrick Jr. Yeah, that Dre Kirkpatrick just got an offer from the Gamecocks this week. And if you're not entirely familiar with that name, but it sounds familiar to you, his father, Dre Kirkpatrick Sr., played for Alabama back in 2010 when the Gamecocks knocked off #1 Alabama in Columbia. There's a really famous image of Alshon Jeffrey catching a pass over him in that game. But yeah, that was one of those that made me feel pretty old because I was in college when that game took place. And now I'm like, wait, there's a kid that could be recruited that's the son of one of those players. So yeah, I mean, obviously pretty good bloodlines there, and we'll see how that develops over time. There's still a long way off on that one. Also, one more official visit I forgot to mention. Athlete, but the Gamecocks look at him as a wide receiver. Kelton Henderson is going to take an official visit on June 10th. So you have three wide receivers, Jaden Greathouse, Devin Hyatt, and Kelton Henderson, all in town on June the 10th. So that could be a big one. So last night, when I tried to go live initially, I did talk about baseball a little bit. So as you know, They dropped another midweek game to USC Upstate earlier this week, which isn't all that surprising. USC Upstate has been pretty good as of late, had a good record in the late season. And South Carolina's midweek pitching has been atrocious all season. They're very thin pitching wise all around. And then last night I had tried to go live before the first game in the Florida series. So I was talking about all these scenarios about how the Gamecocks could potentially still end up in the postseason. And a lot of those scenarios hinged on sweeping Florida, which was always going to be a long shot. And the Gamecocks dropped the first game in the series last night. So even if they win the series at this point, they bounce back and win 2 straight. It's very unlikely that they're going to get in with an at-large bid to the postseason. So it's pretty much win the CC tournament or bust at this point, which based on recent history, South Carolina has not done too well in Hoover. And as I already mentioned, they have not shown very much depth on the pitching staff so far this season. So I would not expect too much. I mean, if you want to keep hoping for a miracle, you can. Obviously, go out and support those guys. I think that they've battled throughout the season. I left them for dead several times, and then the next weekend they'd come back and win a big series or sweep Alabama or beat Texas. They definitely had their moments this year, but I think ultimately it looks like they're going to come up short. And the big question now is, what do you do with Mark Kingston? Because he's made a super regional. He's hosted a regional. He started off pretty good there in that COVID season. I believe they started 12-4. But this past season has been one of the worst in recent memory or distant memory. And his first season as well. So we're gonna have to see how that goes. I get the sense that they might give him one more year, but I also get the sense that there are a lot of worthy candidates out there. If they decided to move on, that would be very interested in the job. So we will keep you posted on that at GamecockScoop.com as we hear more. I don't think anything will happen until after the SEC tournament, obviously. So we'll keep you posted on that. As far as men's basketball recruiting, there's not too much to add from last week. We should know more on Malachi Smith soon, who is their top target at guard. There's a June 1st deadline for him to declare or pull out from the NBA draft. And I'm told the staff does feel like they have a good shot with him if he decides to come back to school. But like I've mentioned before, there's going to be several other programs in the mix there. So we'll have to see on that. Another potential transfer candidate was Bryson Mozone out of USC Upstate. He was a wing, and he just signed with Georgetown this week. So I actually heard that the Gamecock staff kind of pulled back on him, and he wouldn't have had a committable offer anyway. So maybe that's something there, and maybe that means that they have someone else in mind for that last spot. But yeah, so they have two scholarship spots remaining, and I would expect to start to hear some more finalization on those names in the next couple weeks as this NBA draft process starts to work itself out. All right, so that's pretty much it from the Gamecock specific side of things. But there's been some other sort of fun things that have happened this week. So earlier this week, the NCAA announced that conferences can pick the top 2 teams from their conference to go play in the conference championship game rather than it being division winners. Now, this is extremely relevant for some of the conferences that don't already have divisions, but we can expect a lot of things to kind of shake up here in the coming months anyway, especially because last summer the SEC added Oklahoma and Texas. And so I really don't expect them to stick with the 2 division thing at that point. And they've talked about doing pods. They've talked about a bunch of different types of realignment scenarios. Break this down, but probably the most popular idea is that they're going to do 4 pods for the 16 teams. And back when Texas and Oklahoma were first added, there was something released on the SEC network for like potential pods. And it went like this. So you have Pod A, which is Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and South Carolina, which I think wouldn't be too terrible for the Gamecocks. You keep some of those regional rivalries. You keep, Kentucky on the schedule, which is traditionally, I mean, lately they've been sort of stuck in the Gamecocks craw, but traditionally is not the worst possible draw you could get compared to some of the other teams in the SEC. You got Pod B with Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, which Vanderbilt would just get crushed in. But, I guess you're keeping their rivalry with Tennessee. You're keeping Auburn or Alabama's rivalry with Tennessee intact as well. You have Pod C, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. That one's interesting. I don't know how you determine if Texas A&M is going to be with Texas or not in their pod, but you definitely have to make sure that they're playing every year, I think. And then Pod D, which is Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, which is, I guess the rationale there is you're not keeping that completely old Big 12, with Arkansas having been an SEC member for a little while, or longer at least than Missouri or Texas A&M. So I don't know, but that's a regional. I mean, that would make for some fun matchups. And then, so another one of the initial ideas is that you would play the other 3 teams in your pod every season. So South Carolina would play Florida, Georgia, Kentucky every year, and then you'd play 2 games against each of the other pods. And ultimately, this would allow teams to host every team at least once every 4 seasons, which is a lot better than it's been lately. There's been stretches of 8, 9 years in between certain opponents from the West in the current format. So I do think that something needs to be done to make sure that you're actually playing most of the teams in your conference on a semi-regular basis. Now we're expecting a lot of this to get worked out at the SEC coaches meetings here in Destin in June. So obviously we'll keep you posted on that news as it rolls out. But in the wake of the NCAA sort of announcing that divisions don't necessarily matter to make it to the conference championship, a couple of hot takes, let's call them that, have been put out there. And one of the hottest I saw, and, I'm sure that a big part of this was to get attention, and now I'm giving him attention. So whatever. But hey, it's the off season and I want to talk about it. So Stuart Mandel from The Athletic tweeted this out right after the NCAA's decision. Said schools that have released a Power 5 championship or reached a Power 5 championship game that probably never will again once they scrap divisions. All right, you ready for this list? Fan bases that are fairly large have had some level of success. And, there's been a lot of comments underneath this. Let's put it that way. So Duke and Northwestern, fine, maybe. Those probably have the most difficult road of the list of teams that he said, because they're small, they're private, academic requirements, all that, whatever. South Carolina, Missouri, Arizona, and Colorado, pretty much none of those make any sense to me. I'll hold off on my fervor about the South Carolina thing for a second. Colorado, if you go back and redo the Pac-12 championship for the last 10 years based on the 2 best teams with the best record, regardless of division. They actually make 2 of them instead of just 1. So I don't know how you could. I mean, that's in the last 10 years. Arizona, to me, has all the resources, has a lot of attractive things about their campus to get recruits out there. You just got to get the right guy. Missouri has proven in 2 conferences now that they can compete when they have everything sort of rolling there. I don't know if Drinkowitz is the guy to get them back in that contention or not, but I wouldn't count him out either. And then South Carolina. All right, let's look at the peak of South Carolina football. Right, that stretch from 2010 to 2013. And 2010, of course, is the only year that they actually made the SEC championship before they got blown out by Cam Newton and Auburn, who were just steamrolling people by that point of the season. So fine, maybe that team shouldn't have been in the SEC championship game. They were pretty good. They knocked off number 1 Alabama, but you could definitely make the argument that they were not the number 2 best team in the SEC at that point. But the 2011 to 2013 stretch, I think you can certainly make the argument that they were top 4 and often at least in the conversation for the top 2 best teams in the SEC, even though they didn't make it to the championship any of those years. Each one of those years had a loss that really should not have happened, a loss to an inferior team. 2011, South Carolina and Steven Garcia in his, I think that was his last game. It's up there, or it's near the end if it wasn't. Had a terrible game against Auburn that they lost 16-13. They win that one. They finished with 1 loss at the end of the season. They're probably ranked as the 2nd best team in the SEC. 2012 was probably their best team ever. I have to think that that's the best South Carolina team that's ever existed. And they went down there with the flu in Florida and turned the ball over, 700 times. And pretty much every one of those turnovers resulted in a touchdown and lost to a Florida team that they were definitely better than. But they got blown out. It was like 40 to something. I don't even remember. And then 2013 lost a heartbreaker at Tennessee on that last second field goal. If they win any of those 3 games, they are ranked. They are the 2nd best team in the SEC that year. And in 2013, by the end of the bowl season, they ended up ranked as the 2nd best team in the SEC. They were ranked number 4 in the country, and Auburn was ranked number 2 in the country in the final poll. So all of that to say, it's never's a long time. I mean, it's been done. It's possible. South Carolina has all the resources that it needs. Now, granted, they had one of the best coaches in college football history walking the sideline at that time, and it remains to be seen if Shane Beamer is that next guy. But like I said, never is a long time, and I wouldn't count them out from ever being able to compete in that space again. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year or anything, but never is a long time. Now you could make the argument that the divisions made the road a little bit simpler. Although if it does play out with the pods the way that I laid it out a minute ago, where they're in the pod with Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, I mean, you tell me they can't string together a win against all 3 of those teams in a given year and then get lucky with the way that the other pod schedules work out. I think that's certainly possible. So we'll see, but I disagree, I guess, with Stuart Mandel. Really, for any of those teams, I think it's just such a tweet of the moment. Whereas if you would have looked back 10 years ago, literally 2012, that list looks way different. And I'm thinking 10 years from now, that list would look way different too. So there's no doubt that the landscape is changing, that the SEC is getting more difficult, not easier. But I also, never's a long time. Never's a really long time. All right. That is pretty much all of my piece there. But I do have my silly section, which last week, Zach and I used the silly section of the show to draft cereals. It would seem that Zach won, by the way, with his cereal draft. I got to an early lead in the poll, but it sort of got away from me. So this week, all this news around Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban, you'll notice that I didn't talk a whole lot about it. I mean, there's plenty of national podcasts that can talk about it if you want to go check those out, or national articles or whatever. I don't really care. I mean, it's whatever. I get it. They're mad at each other. I'll watch the Texas A&M Alabama game this year. It'll be a good time. But it did get me thinking, what if the SEC head coaches like actually got in a fight, not just like throwing verbal words at each other, but like actually got in a fight? So I don't know how many of you remember the old show on MTV, Celebrity Deathmatch. But I decided to think about the SEC head coaches in a sort of celebrity deathmatch situation. And yeah, I was trying to think which SEC head coach would get their way out of a steel cage if all of them were thrown in there at once. So I don't know. Let's kind of look at some of the contenders. You got Clark Lee of Vandy. He was a former linebacker and fullback. So, let's table that one. That's nice. You got Napier at Florida. I mean, he was a former quarterback. Same with Josh Heupel, but Napier does at least have a buzz cut. He looks a little bit tough. I don't know. I like Eli Drinkwitz's spunk, and he definitely has some of the verbal bars, or whatever. But I don't know. Have you ever seen him? He's kind of nerdy. I think he's probably dying pretty quick. I actually think Beamer's got a reasonable shot, especially if there are any sort of alliances or whatever. I think he gets in there, wins some guys over with his personality. But I think as the numbers get down to the end, I don't know. I mean, he's young too. He's a contender. He's a contender. You got Sam Pittman. He played defensive end back in college, but he's 60. He doesn't look like he's necessarily kept his game shape going on. So I don't know. I don't know. He might be able to stick around just based on pure volume for a little while, but I think eventually he's getting outlasted. I don't think there's no way Kiffin has hands, right? Like, I mean, he's funny and all. He's good at Twitter, I guess, but when it came to an actual fight, I don't see him lasting very long. Jimbo was a pretty good athlete. Let's put it this way. If Jimbo and Nick Saban got into a physical fight, I do think Jimbo probably wins a physical fight. I'll say it. But I don't see him coming out of this 14 coach death match as the winner. Brian Kelly, come on. He went to private school in Massachusetts. He's not winning. Mark Stoops, I think he's a sleeper. He did play some D1 ball back at Iowa. Played some safety, and I think he looks like he's still got it. He's 54 years old. I don't know. What do you guys think? I think probably if I'm putting my money on it, I'm going to put it on Clark Lee, former linebacker, fullback. He knows, what it takes to get a little like dirty in there. And he's only 40. He's one of the younger guys, one of the younger coaches in the conference. So he's got the stamina. Looks like he's still in pretty good shape. I'm going to go Clark Lee. Although if Derek Mason was still around, I think I would go Derek Mason. But all right, this was a shortened episode, and my voice was shot throughout. Hopefully, I cut out all the coughs and stuff. Sorry about that. Next week, we'll get back with Zach. We'll hear about his road trip and some of the recruits that he talked to on the road. And Hope you have a good weekend, and we'll catch up soon. This has been the Gamecock Scoop podcast. Check out all of our latest articles on gamecockscoop.com. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on whatever podcast app, Spotify, Apple, Google, all of them, Podbean. But yeah, until next time, have a good one.